For a free report.
If you're looking for the latest news, insight into what it means, and the sharpest opinion, there's only one station in Chicago where you can turn, and it's this one. We're AM 560, The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. I'm very excited to talk to our next guest, Chris Arnade, for a lot of reasons. I've been following him on Twitter for a while. We mentioned his excellent piece in First Things the other week. Chris Arnade, who is, I think, the best writer who is a former bond trader in the history of financial markets. Really good writer, and turns out to be a really good photojournalist, too. He's got a book out that is built upon his leaving Wall Street to go out to America and talk to Americans and understand what's happening in small town or back row America, as he describes it. Small town, but also not just small town, but forgotten neighborhoods in bigger communities, too. The book is Dignity, Seeking Respect in Back Row America. Chris Arnade is the Wall Street bond trader turned photojournalist, and he joins us now. Chris, thanks so much for being with us. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Really enjoyed your work. But why don't we just start at the beginning, go back to your decision to leave Wall Street and embark upon this adventure you embarked upon?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it comes back to the financial crisis. There was a realization on my part that what I was doing, what we elites were doing, what I call the front row, the kind of educated elites were doing, bond traders, lawyers, we had done some great damage to the country during the financial crisis, and I kind of wanted to get out and maybe rethink the way I thought about things instead of looking at just computer screens all day. Actually talk to people, and get their opinions and hear their views.
Well, how did you grow Oh, I'm sorry. Please finish.
So in any case, I ended up just basically walking into neighborhoods all over the country, initially in the Bronx, that people told me not to go to, places that had been long stigmatized.
And where did you grow up?
I grew up initially in Florida, in a small rural town, and then I had moved my way up to New York City through education. And
I just want to make the point too, because there's been a lot of talk about some of these forgotten Americans and trying to understand what happened in 2016 by political pundits who haven't gone to these communities. But this well predates the 2016 election, your journey, and it's the result, and your impressions are the result of this interaction throughout the nation, right?
That's right. It started in basically 2013, and then I spent roughly 3 years in the Bronx in a small neighborhood. That's, I guess for Chicago, I think of some of the rougher neighborhoods in Chicago South Side. Mm-hmm. That's kind of it's primarily minority, almost 95% minority, 40% poverty rates, and it's I just basically ended up becoming close friends and documenting a bunch of kind of a street family of homeless addicts who lived under bridges and in junkyards and all those things, and then I went on across the rest of the country. I went put 150,000 miles on my car, going to similar neighborhoods. I mean, I spent a few weeks in Gary, Indiana, just down the road from you guys, mm-hmm. And that's partially in the book as well. That description of Gary.
What was the craziest town that you experienced?
Craziest. I mean, I think the often what I think is the most frustrating and most depressing is communities in large cities that have been long stigmatized by racism. So, for instance, Baltimore, the traditionally African American community in Baltimore. There's so much problems they face, and I think although I didn't spend much time in Chicago, I would drive through on my way up to Wisconsin. Yeah. Gary has it rough, and I feel despite the wonderful qualities of the residents, despite the wonderful neighborhoods there, I think it still has it rough.
But how do they cope though with being stigmatized? You go to a place like Gary, it has been the same. It's been economically depressed for decades now.
What I've tried to document or show in my book is that people have other outlets for dealing with, the stigmatization. One of the things I found initially when I went into the Bronx, for instance, was, people kind of create meaning in community where they can. So in the Bronx, I don't know if it's the case in Chicago as much. In these communities, you have people who keep pigeons on the roof, and I find that really beautiful. This hobby of taking what others kind of call, rats with wings, and and turning it into this beautiful artwork where they fly them in wonderful sequences. But the other thing is, like, one of the things I found in both the Bronx and Gary and all across the country was McDonald's. They form communities in McDonald's. If you go into a McDonald's in some of these neighborhoods, it's often where people come and hang out and meet, and it's almost like their clubhouse, their community center. And I think, you kind of make best with what you have. I think people across the country, that what I try to emphasize in my book, is that people who've been stigmatized or frustrated by racism, by economic problems, by what have you, always manage to make the best of what they have.
You also talk about another institution in many of these neighborhoods, and that's church. And you write about this. Tell us about Preacher Man, who you met when you were young, and then after your travels, how you sort of reconsider the message from Preacher Man.
Yeah, when I was growing up, I was intent on getting out of my town, like a lot of educated people can have it. And one of the things I did as a child or teenager was I worked on a crew where I was one of two whites or so out of 30 people. And there was a preacher there. We called him Preacher Man. He had small round glasses, and he would try to always convert me and read the Bible. And, back then I thought I knew it all. And I was a smart kid, and I basically told him no. I told him I don't want any of your trash. I don't want any of your gobbledygook. Just leave me alone. I'm an atheist. And one of the things that happened in this process of this, these 150,000 miles that over the last 7 years is, when I always say when I walked into the Bronx, I was an atheist. And I'm not so sure what I am right now. I don't know if I'm an atheist. I'm not sure I'm particularly religious, but I certainly came to see immense value in religion. I saw it in all these communities where often the only place that was accepting of people and let them in and help them was churches. And I look back now at my younger self and feel kind of frustrated with how closed-minded I was, and the reality is what was going on in Preacher Man's life. He was just trying to make the best of what life had given him, and he was in this town. He was going to stay there, and he probably didn't have the means to get out if he wanted to. And I was just some kid who was going to get out of town, and so I need to kind of feel bad for having thought of him as the way I did.
I love this story, and I love sort of a thread that runs through your writing from what I've read, and that's humility. It's sort of a quality that's lost in so many circles, particularly the professional elites, the highly educated, some might argue overeducated. Humility. One of the things you seem to have experienced through this process is understanding what you didn't understand, and you're actually living the reflective life. Going back, thinking about Preacher Man is a good example. And one of the observations I really like is you're thinking back to your Wall Street days. You and people in your social strata have everything under control, and it's really a pretense. And people in a lot of the communities you visited and spoke with, they don't have everything under control, and they know it, and they're trying to cope with what they can't control.
Right, and I think one of the things I tried to do in the book, I have a definite political view. It's definitely on the left, but what I try to do is leave that out of the book, because one of the things I learned and intended to learn from this book was trying to understand that someone like me, a bond trader who has a PhD, maybe all my life, I thought I understood everything, and I thought I figured it out, and I was more than happy to tell people what they should do. And maybe it's time for me to just, be quiet and listen, and listen to these stories. And what I try to do in the book is give the reader those stories and let them make their own decision about what that means, and instead of hammering everybody on the head and saying, this is the way it should be, this is my view, this is how I think it is. Part of what I think as a scientist, there's a big difference when it comes to being a scientist, which I used to be, versus understanding faith, and one of that in my view is humility, is understanding that maybe we don't have this under control. Maybe there are things just larger out there that we will never understand, and it's better to accept that than to try to keep on thinking we can figure it out all the time.
Now you've had to approach people you probably normally wouldn't speak with, but what question do you ask every person before you photograph them?
I think the photograph is often the last thing I do, partly because I want them to make sure they know who I am and feel and feel comfortable with the process, and make sure they understand what's going to happen, that this is going to go in a book and go online, and what that really means, and how maybe that means more than they understand it means. But what I also ask them is, I say, look, I want you to be happy with this picture. I want you to be comfortable with the picture, and if you don't like it, I'll delete it. The reason I do that is I really think that the wealthy, us, me, and others, and what I call the front row, can control our image. We allow people to see us the way we want to be seen. And I think so often the poor and the working class, the back row, don't have that ability. They tend to get photographed, without having the ability to present themselves as they want. So, I allow people to go in the bathroom, clean up, or put on makeup, or do their hair, because I think it's really important, no matter your situation, to be allowed to be seen as you want to be seen.
That's a great point. I mean, it's I think it's why the book is aptly titled Dignity. And despite the fact that you said, you lean left, you've got a quote on the cover of the book from J.D. Vance, author of the surprise bestseller Hillbilly Elegy, who is certainly leans right. He describes the book as a profound book. It will break your heart, but also leave you with hope. And I wonder, dignity seems to be the sort of a unifying thing across political divides. The idea that it's easy to dismiss people in Appalachia as white trash. It's easy to dismiss people in urban neighborhoods as gangbangers or some caricature of people. But one of the things it seems to me you've done a great job of doing, and by the way, you turn out to be quite a talented photographer, which helps, is humanize people that are caricatured by group identity.
Right. I mean, I think it's really important, regardless of your political views, to, and I don't want to make that a big issue. I mean, it's just I think we all, on the left and on the right, certainly I wish my party would do it more, and I've in the past been very adamant that I wish the right wing would do it more. Is to give kind of walk a mile in someone's shoes before you judge them. It's something we on the left have rightfully, I think, asked people when they talk about inner city communities like Gary to just understand the full situation, understand what people face and why they make the decisions they make, and I think the same should be done no matter what the group of people is, if it's black, white, Hispanic. If you're making a judgment about a group of people without really understanding what they face, without walking a mile in their shoes, I think you're doing it wrong. I think you're going to end up, caricaturing them. Because you're going to define them in a way that makes you feel better about not having to deal with them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, are you ever going back to Wall Street, or is this going to be your avocation for some time to come?
I'm not so sure they would let me back, given how my feelings are about them.
Sort of a Michael Lewis situation.
I think like I said, I feel like this book took a lot out of me. It was a lot of time on the road. As much as I love driving, and as much as I love being stuck in traffic in Chicago. Yeah,
right. There are limits. Right. We get it. Yeah.
I think my next project is more to focus on faith, something I don't feel I fully understand, and I think it's and to do so in a community that's kind of where I don't have to drive so often.
Okay. Well, there's a lot of communities that probably fit that bill. He is Chris Arnade, the author of the book Dignity, Seeking Respect in Back Row America. And again, you check out as sort of a advance of the book, Back Row America at firstthings.com. I tweeted it out. I'll retweet it out again. Chris Arnade, thanks so much for joining us. Really appreciate it, and good luck with the book.
Thank you for having me.